It's overwhelming, but it's also our jobs.
Our job is only going to get harder.
It's worrisome.
This is something that's unprecedented.
Now is not the time to be a cowboy. No one has anything to prove. We're all in this together.
Welcome to Reporting from the Frontline of a Pandemic. I'm Natalie Benoit, and I'm here with Nicole Estaphan, a reporter and producer at WCVB-TV Chronicle in Boston. So thank you for joining me, Nicole. I just have a few questions regarding, COVID-19, the coronavirus. So my first question is, how have you had to adjust the way you work?
Okay, so there's a lot of answers to that question. I'm going to start with when we first started seeing the signs of this coming here, we decided we would be working on a show called Pandemic. And when we first started, obviously, we were in the hospitals talking to doctors, and very quickly we had to readjust like everyone else and reinvent the wheel. And we do 30-minute shows that take some time to produce. As soon as we had our story, the world had changed. So then we'd have to go and reinvent. So I think for us, it has been a real challenge to do slow turnaround stories in a world where everything's changing constantly.
Would you say that, with everything that's going on this pandemic, have you ever had to do as much adjusting before in terms of having to revamp what's happening? Because there's new updates almost every single day. If not every single hour, there's new information coming out. So what has it been like working?
Well, I have covered some pretty dynamic stories in the past, the Boston bombing, which changed on a regular. There was always new information coming out. Ebola, which was a little different. I covered that in Atlanta. I think as a news reporter, you're constantly adjusting anyway. And that is the most interesting thing I've found. We're kind of a breed of people, if you will, that are used to just going with the flow and getting new information and turning it. But even for us, this is the extreme. Usually when you cover a story or any like weather related event or any tragedy, there's the event and then there's the recovery and the impact, but there's kind of a storyline within the story itself to follow. Here, I think this is the first time I've really been faced with a situation that has gone on so long where it's just a continuing beginning, right? It's a continuing beginning. We don't have those stories of recovery yet. We don't have those stories of, moving on because it's just keeps starting every day.
And how has your station or the network overall been covering, the COVID-19, the coronavirus?
Well, I mean, I think the news department and Chronicle have their own unique roles to begin with. So the news department has a schedule where only a certain amount of people are allowed in the building at a certain time, right? So the physical differences have now taken place because what we want to do is isolate as many people as possible in case somebody does come down with it. We still have a staff because it's considered essential. So our schedules have adjusted, and Chronicle's in a unique scenario where a lot of our stories are feel-good stories, and we travel and we show people their communities. So, and a lot of our we benefit greatly from having amazing photographers. So a lot of our stories are based on image and sound and connection. So we have tried to find ways to present stories to give people a break, give them a bright spot after, they've seen the news all day, they've seen all their Netflix, and now we want to give them something, but it is such a challenge to do without being able to connect with people.
What kind of messages do you get from viewers? Have you heard back from any, specific people? Have they reached out to you in terms of what they want to see on Chronicle or in general with WCVB?
Yeah, we do a show called Main Street's Backroads, which basically takes people on a trip, right, via the television. And a lot of people have written in to suggest some interest in that because they can't go right now. So they want us to take them away. I have seen something happening which is really interesting, and I think this is what's happening at home and in our all lives. I think the first couple weeks we were going through this, people were really like, thank you for the break, let's do this. And now I see people, I don't want to say getting frustrated, but I want to say they're home, so now they have more opinions. Let's put it that way. So I think a lot of people are home and they're kind of hitting their point where we don't know where this is ending. So yeah, but I think that's kind of a normal thing, and it's actually helped us as reporters to kind of understand that as well, that emotions will be going back and forth and up and down daily as the story develops.
And what has been the hardest thing about covering the pandemic? You know, you talked a little bit about not having as an easy way to connect with people because you're not seeing them in person. So would you say that's been the hardest part, or is there something else that's a little more challenging?
I think for us, we rely on both reporters and producers here. We rely on conversation with our colleagues to help the creative process or to maybe work through a story and how we would be presenting it. And that has really been driven home for us. Maybe we didn't realize how much we rely on each other to just quickly discuss something or get some input. So that has been the hardest, to be separated from colleagues. What I have found is that people still want to connect, so we can't physically be next to them. We've adapted. We've put our microphones on long poles in certain scenarios, interviewed people through windows like everyone else. So we can adjust in that way, but I think the hardest thing is for us to be separated from our coworkers.
Right. Another question I have is, I guess, what has surprised you the most about your coverage in Boston?
You know, I'm not going to say I was surprised because I covered the Boston bombing and I saw the city shut down. I mean, it was temporary, right? It was, I don't know if it was 24, 48 hours, but I actually saw the city was capable of doing that for a greater purpose, right? In this case, to kind of keep everyone safe and track people down. So I knew the city had the ability to do it. And I don't know if I'm surprised by it, but I actually think Boston and Massachusetts has done a phenomenal job so far dealing with this. To be able to ask people to stay home, get most people to comply, but still maintain some of those things that are so vital to our mental health, like being able to go for a walk. And, you know, the acts of kindness, again, not a surprise when you've covered events, but it reminds me that when we go through any crisis, that humanity really, the best of humanity, is really highlighted. So yeah, I mean, that's been the silver lining in all of this.
And how are you yourself dealing with all the stress that, of course, the coronavirus is bringing, you know, as just a human being, as a producer, a reporter?
I don't really think I've hit that wall yet of really feeling the anxiety because we've been so busy and so focused, and the beauty in having this position is we're still going to work, right? So our routines haven't been interrupted as much. We still have a job to do. But I think, again, it's the simple things. It's just, you know, maintaining a connection through Zoom with my friends and family, being able to talk to them, and just really taking care of myself, like going for those walks or, you know, eating healthy. But I think it's important to note that sometimes journalists are kind of pushed aside as being on the front line of things, and we're kind of the observers of society. So we're taking in a lot of information and we're seeing both the good and the bad. And I think it's really important for every journalist to recognize that and really take a moment to digest everything that we've seen for themselves. And I don't think we take the time to do that, and it is so important.
How have you been maintaining a balance of both working and at home? Are you working from home often, or are you working, you know, in the office like you said?
So because I was a news reporter with the station for a few years, I am doing two jobs now. So I'm doing news reporting when I'm not working at Chronicle and Chronicle. So I'm actually still in the field and I'm still out there. I think the most important thing about the balance is making sure everyone at home is okay, because they've lost their routines, right? So sometimes I'm jealous and I'm like, oh, you guys are home? I want to see that show. I want to do that. I want to like chill on the couch. But then you realize how important our roles are and our purposes are in our lives. So for me, it's just making sure I check in, make sure that everyone there is okay. And then again, checking in with myself before I go home to be like, okay, like this was a lot, and now it's time to just connect with our family.
Certainly. Has there been, in your coverage with everything that's been going on, has there been a specific story or moment that stuck out with you?
I covered a story the other day of a family. They were so cute. A family who was meeting their grandchild for the first time through a window at North Shore Hospital, and it was on the first floor. And I remember having that moment thinking like, wow, this is different. They can't cuddle. It's so sad. But the joy was exactly the same. Like it was the same feeling, and their laughter and their smiles was the same you would see if they were in that room. And in that moment, I kind of realized like you can take away so many things, and maybe those hugs are gone for the moment, but the things we truly value and bring us happiness, the joy, we find ways to make that happen.
I just read a story from North Jersey News, and it was just
Yeah,
at the Bergen Hospital here in my county. There was
yeah,
a family, and they were showing the baby like through a fourth-story window, and they had
yeah.
pictures and everything.
Yeah, and it's just we're finding different ways. I've seen, birthday parties that have become parades now, right? So it's just I'm actually writing that story right now, so it's funny, but it's special to see us connect in this way. And I think maybe in the end, when this changes and we can all come back together again, we know that there'll be losses and things to grieve, but maybe we hug each other longer. Or
Right.
maybe we sit down and have that tea with someone we haven't had in a long time. So I'm actually looking forward to covering the stories when this is over.
What advice do you have for anyone wanting to go into broadcast journalism, maybe a student like myself who only has one other semester after this one?
That's a good question, because, if you had asked me this before this pandemic, if you will, came into play, I would have had a lot of advice about social media and, maintaining your accuracy and all of this. But I think letting the people navigate the story, because that is where we are right now. That's what this situation is bringing out. So my advice would be to be an observer and really take in other people's experience, right? Don't be so focused on being the first person to get a story, or being that exclusive. Like, it's about sharing our experiences as humans. And I think the best journalists in the world have a level of empathy, to connect with others and to draw out that story in a way that makes it about human connection. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but
Yeah, no.
it's about respecting each other in a very real way. You still have to report some hard things sometimes, but I think doing it in a respectful way.
Yeah, and definitely I feel like I've seen compassion be a huge part of journalism,
Yeah,
good stories, because people open up more. So
yeah, definitely.
thank you. That's good advice. Thank you. And of course, one of the other questions I want to ask, is there anything that you think people aren't covering that much in terms of the pandemic? Is there anything that you think we need to see more of on the news, whether that's within your own station or just in general?
Well, I'm trying to do that now with a story, and I think reminding people that society has faced these things before. It may feel like the first time to us, but there will be a future. Things will look different, but we will recover and we will move on. And I think also to document this for journalists is so important. We don't know if 100 years from now people will pay attention to the things that we may have done wrong or the lessons we've learned, because we're ignoring some of the things from the Spanish flu or the 1918 flu from years ago, right? We are listening in some ways with the pandemic curve, but I'll get into that. So I just think journalists are documenting what's going on now, but that will be the history that will provide clues for people living in the future. And I think that is an important role for us.
Is there anything else that you'd like to mention or add from your part as someone that's reporting and producing in Boston?
I think it's very commonplace for journalists to jump into a story and, kind of report this, and this, and, this is right and this is wrong, meaning what they're telling us, right? Whether it be our government or whatever. And I think what I've seen in Boston is just a real sense to get out the important stuff. Like, we need masks. or we need equipment. And I think that has become our role, to let society know what other people need, because they can't ask right now necessarily, right? They can do this or social media.
Anything else that comes to mind that you want to share? So if there's other things that you want to mention, certainly go for it.
Well, I just think for college students in particular, I feel really bad for seniors. I feel, that certain moments are taking away, graduation and sports and all of these milestone moments. But I think it's also an opportunity for them to look, especially journalists, like we said before, to look at what society is doing and to find those silver linings and the kindness and the bright spots, and to really focus in on those. I don't know. I just think it's a unique experience for journalists. And I actually think this will change the way we do our jobs, because we're finding out that we can do a lot of things remotely. And what I really hope is that businesses don't see this as a way to save money. Do you know what I mean? I'm not talking about journalism, but you're seeing all these businesses shut down because, like I said before, going back to the beginning, human connection is so important. Those discussions that randomly pop up when you're next to your coworkers, or those, brainstorms or brain thoughts. So I think technology has been a beautiful thing for all of us to connect, but I'm hoping it doesn't replace those things that are so important to the creative process or to the journalistic experience.
A lot of people have talked about how this is going to change the way people interact moving forward. What are your thoughts in terms of that? Because you did talk a little bit about how this is going to change not only journalism, in the future, but just I think the way people are going to interact moving forward. Do you think people are going to be more hesitant about, about being around certain people, or what are your thoughts in terms of that?
Well, yeah, and I think throughout history, we have seen with every epidemic or pandemic, there's been a lot of xenophobia. So I think certain groups always fall under, it's like the first thing we see is scapegoating, right? So we want to blame somebody when we're uncertain about things, no matter the situation. And unfortunately, what we see with disease is, during the AIDS epidemic, we were, scared of and blaming homosexuals. And now, a big portion of the Asian community is experiencing that as well. So I hope and pray that that doesn't stay with us, that goes away. And my biggest concern, I guess, would be we are kind of adapting to, even when we walk down the street, not going too close to people. And I hope that this doesn't stay in our psyche so long that there isn't an end to that, right? Because what would society be like if we weren't touching each other and feeling those moments of compassion and intimacy with strangers? That's where the beauty is.
Thank you, Nicole, for taking the time to talk to me and for the work you're doing to keep us informed and safe. And thank all of you for watching this episode of Reporting from the Frontline of a Pandemic. I've been talking with Nicole Estaphan, a reporter and producer from WCVB-TV Chronicle in Boston. I'm Natalie Benoit.